Hi, this is Chris the Guitar Amp Tech from Sydney, Australia. Today we're going to be looking at this Silverface Fender amp and at some of the odd things that were done with it. So I'm not sure what's been done inside, but I can tell you what's been done on the outside and you'll see it with me shortly. So go grab... what is it? What? You can't tell what amp that is? You're thinking it's a Fender Champ. What about now? I'm wondering if it's a Fender Twin. No, it's a Champ. I'm just being an idiot. Go and grab yourself a coffee and be right back. Now you may be able to see these antenna ears of my little apprentice here. He wants to help me out with some of this stuff. What's the first thing you notice about these two amps? Well, this one's mine, and this one's the customer's. What is it? What do you see? Oh, I think it's the switches, Dad. I think you might be right, Harley. Mine has got the traditional slider switch. The customer's has got a toggle switch. At first I thought they just retrofitted, but it's not, because if it was the slider, there would have been screw holes above and below where that slider was. There's no screw holes there. And in fact, the word on is where that screw hole would be. So I'm thinking that's original to the amp. Look, Fender did so much swapping and changing. I didn't think the toggle switch came in until 77. Don't know. If you know, please put it in the comment. But the customer claims that this is a 74. So that's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to check the transformers and see if we can narrow that down a bit. Let's flip this around and see what else we can see. This is what I'm concerned about. Instead of a 6V6, we have an EL34. Instead of a 5Y3, we've got a 5U4GB. Putting in an EL34 isn't suddenly going to make it louder. We will check this, but I'm not expecting it to be. Why? Because unless he has changed the power transformer, and it doesn't look like he has, but I'll have a closer look. This thing's going to be drawing a lot more current than a 6V6. This will be drawing in Class A 100%. Let's figure it out. EL34 is a 25 watt tube. We know that power equals voltage times current. So 25 equals, now with Class A we're going to work on 100%. So we're going to say it's 25 watt power dissipation. Voltage for a Champ you'd be expecting around about 360. Let's take off some volts because we're only going to be concerned about, because this is Class A with a cathode bias, we're only going to be concerned about the plate to cathode voltage. Let's knock off 10 volts for ease of calculation and say 350 times current. So our current is going to be 25 divided by 350 at 100%. Anyone got a calculator? Oh, I have, Dad. Oh, good on you, Harley. Can you divide 25 by 350 and tell me what the answer is? The answer is 71.4 milliamps. 71.4 milliamps. Thanks, Harley. No problem, Dad. Now let's do that same calculation for a 6V6, which is a 14 watt tube. So 14 watts equals 350 times I. Yes, I know that this voltage will not be exactly the same, but we get the point. Okay, Harley, 14 divided by 350. 14 divided by 350 is 40 milliamps. Thanks, Harley. No problem, Dad. All right, so already we can see that changing that tube from a 6V6 to an EL34 has increased the current drop by 100% just about. Has he changed the cathode bias resistor? We don't know yet. But of even greater concern than this is the rectifier tubes. This is a 5U4GB, 5U4, and a 5U4 has got a heater current of, oh God, I think it's about 3 amps. And the 5Y3, which is stock in this, is I think 1.92 amps, we'll call it 2 amps. So even more significant than the current draw of this is the load on the 5-volt winding, the rectifier winding, of a 50% increase. And this is a big increase because it's an extra 1 amp of current. That's a significant current draw. So unless he has upgraded the power transformer, we're going to see a significant load on the power transformer. However, I do note that it has a very nice speaker here, probably nicer than the original one. In my Champ, where's my Champ? You'll see I have also upgraded that speaker to my preferred speaker. I put in an Alnico Weber. Interesting, 1 amp. So whoever did this work increased the fuse from 0.5 amp to 1 amp, predominantly because of this. Now, before we apply power to this, I have the Champ on the stand. I have got in there the valves that it came in with, which is a nice old US 12AX7. We've got the 5U4 rectifier tube. Stock is 5Y3. It's going to be drawing significantly higher heater current. On the 5-volt winding of the transformer, the 5Y3 draws about 1.9 amp. The 5U4 draws about 3 amps. That's a fair bit more. That's 50% increase in that 5-volt winding. And it's going to be putting out a higher plate voltage. Then it's going into an EL34, which is a 25-watt tube, where we'd normally see a 6V6, a 14-watt tube. What difference will that make, if anything? Is the customer thinking it's going to make a significant increase in power, maybe doubling of the power? I don't think it will be. We're going to measure it and see what it is. I'll also measure the total current draw of the amplifier from the wall outlet and see if that gives us a clue as to the extra work that the amp is currently doing with this tube configuration. Just want to have a little bit of a word about the rectifier tubes and the options. So the standard is 5Y3. It's got a fair amount of sag in it. I did a video on tubes and sag a little while ago. I'll put a link to it up here and you can have a look at that. At the other end of the scale, no sag at all is solid state. And there is a solid state equivalent, Yellow Jackets, YJR rectifier. Why don't we just plug that in? Well, and it says here something which I think is bordering on negligent, or at least stupid. I don't know if you can see that. It's just focusing on my face. Focus on that, not on my face. And it's saying 5AR4, which is the same as a GZ34, 5U4, and a 5Y3. That ain't the same, mate. Solid state rectifier's got a higher plate voltage, higher B plus than all of these, and nowhere near a 5Y3 replacement. You could say it's close to a GZ34 because they're so efficient. So in there at the moment is a 5U4. Now, if we like the sound of the 5U4 and it's not causing us any issues, but we want to take that big 2 amp load off the power transformer, what can we do about it? Well, Weber has already made us a rectifier replacement called the copper cap. And they've got them in several different versions. This particular one happens to be a replacement for a GZ34, which they're calling a WZ34 for weather. Beauty of this is inside here there are just diodes and two big power resistors. And their range of copper caps have different drop-in resistors to emulate the sag of different tube rectifiers. So I like them. I use them in some of my amps, like in my 18 watt hand-wired Marshall 1974. I'm using this instead of an EZ81. Lower stress on the power transformer, that's the reason. And I also have, if I'm liking it better, I have a little stash of never used 5Y3 rectifier tubes. These are made by Philips. Pretty sure this was made in Australia under license, probably in the 60s or 70s. Let's have a look. Yes, made in Australia. Excellent tubes. Interesting. Power transformer, that is the right part number, L010020. For a Champ. I think also Princeton might have used that as well, not sure. But this is interesting. The EIA code is 606, which is the Schumacher brand. And the next three numbers are 737, which says the 37th week of 1977. So I don't think this is a 74 amp at all, which also ties in with the power switch being a toggle, because I think that came in 77 or 78. Let's have a look at the output transformer. Now the output transformer is interesting. EIA code 606, Schumacher again, but the year of manufacture of the output transformer is 1964, the 28th week. So that is where the 1974 date came from, but you always have to take the youngest component for the date. I think by 77 they stopped stamping the tube chart. Yeah, no, there's no date stamp on the tube chart. You can see that the main multi-can cap has been replaced. In the Silverface Champ, the capacitors on the for the main filter caps were 20, 20 and 20 microfarad. This one's 40, 20 and 20. No biggie, I quite prefer it that way anyway. All right, I'm going to flip this over, so I'll just remove these so I don't damage them. You can come out too. Just out of curiosity, what have we got here? Oh, this is nice. A GE perhaps, 12AX7. All right, what do we have here? Here's the other side of the toggle power switch. I like the fact that it's a double pole switching both the active and neutral. That's a nicer feature. Then we have our 3-core flex coming in here, switching both the active, which is brown, and the neutral, which is blue. The ground wire is going to that bolt that is shared with the transformer. It looks original, but I'm not mad keen on that. I may take that off from there and resolder it directly to the chassis, which is my preferred one, as you've probably seen in other videos. Where is the active going? Active is going here, switching to the white. White is going to the fuse. Correct. Then it goes from the fuse to the transformer. And the neutral is coming out. The switch, black wire going to transformer. Excellent. Okay, first time I've seen the power actually wired correctly. This is the same brand of multi-cap can that I use, but my guess is that he didn't have a hot enough soldering iron, because these solder joints here, the ground connections, look pretty dodgy. In fact, I'm pretty sure that with enough force I could lift that one up. So I'll redo these again. I can see where he has scraped away just with a screwdriver to get some good metal to metal contact there, but it's a bit messy. I much prefer to use something like this at the end of my Dremel and it'll just give me a better, neater job. Yeah, not the neatest job, but we can tidy that up all right. Our first dropping resistor in a Champ is a 1K, which is correct. That's obviously been replaced at some stage. The next dropping resistor is a 10K. So let's just have a quick check to see if that's still within spec, because that's going to affect the plate voltages of our preamp tube. Bang. See, not all carbon comps have drifted way outside spec. That's still very good at 10.8 kilo ohm. I'm going to leave that one. That's our cathode resistor. Should be 470. So that hasn't been changed in going from the 6V6 to EL34. I thought that might have been reset. Okay, well, that's definitely going to get changed. It's supposed to be 470. It was reading 780. This is a bit odd. There's a little capacitor of the cathode, and it's just obviously been clipped and just left hanging there. What's it there for? I don't know. It's not in the schematic as far as I know. I'm thinking when you see a little capacitor like that, you tend to think oscillation. So it's probably, we're going to see if we have an oscillation issue. This is a bit bizarre. Don't know if you can see that, but there is. Is that celastic? Yeah, there is. There's silicon here between pin 3, the plate, and the heater on pin 2. Why is it so? In all honesty, I can't. But we will apply power carefully and see if we can see any reason for that. Is it a dodgy tube base? In which case, I mean, I'm all for keeping it original. But if meaning that the only way to have oscillation between pin 2, which is 6 volts, and pin 3, which is going to be something like 360 volts, is put celastic in there, then I think that's just wrong. Typical Champ thing here, where they have the 68K resistors, which on pretty much every other amp, they're directly wired to the input jacks. Here they've got them mounted on the board. We'll leave them there. That's the way they did it. The other thing that Fender did that I'm not mad keen on is how they handle the filament wiring. And you'll see here's one green for the filament wiring, here's the other green for the filament wiring. And as you may recall, these are normally tightly twisted together. They go to the pilot light and from there to each of the power tubes. I don't know why I pointed to that, that's 5 volt. I meant power tube and preamp tube. But in the Champs, they wire one leg of that 6.3 volt filament to ground. And the other end goes to the pilot light and onwards. And you can probably see that the other end of that filament gets soldered to ground. So not the best in terms of noise, because we've now got that 6.3 volt winding generating electromagnetic noise. But they are still surprisingly quiet. I'm happy to see these blue caps still in there, and they haven't been replaced with some horrid orange drop. Sounds like I've got something against orange drops. I don't. They're fine in amps that you want to sound hard and brittle like a Mitsubishi. Oh, there I go again. Sorry. Not many components here, so let's just quickly whip through them and see that they're all in spec. This should be 1.5K, and it is 1.67. Could slightly affect the bias. That is 10% out. Probably I'm going to leave it. We'll see. 35, 35. That's because they're in parallel at this point. 100K. A fair bit of wax underneath these 100K resistors. 106, nice. 104, even nicer. Should be 47. It's 48. That's good. 220. Is it 220? Yeah, 220. And that's to 45, just over 10%. The first triode in the 12AX7 boosts the gain of the input signal. Then it goes through our tone controls, bass and treble tone controls. Then it comes to a recovery stage, which is the second triode of the Champ. And coming in between the cathode resistor and ground, which is normally what it'd go to, is this 47 ohm resistor. And that is there specifically to pick up the negative feedback which comes back from your speaker. So that's 47, it should be 47, and it is 48.5, that's fine. And that 220 is 2.4, which is also fine. And that's our grid leak resistor of our 6V6. Here's our second cathode resistor, should be 1.5, 1.6, that's fine. This is our feedback resistor. As you can see, it comes from the speaker contact, 2.7K. That's a little bit funny. 49 ohm. So the only way to check that is we're just going to lift one leg of that and see that that is close to 2.7K. All right, now I'm going to be using my LCR meter. I've set it to 100 Hertz because that's the frequency that this is operating at. This is why some of the cheaper ESR meters are just not good enough, because ESR is a factor of frequency, and a lot of these cheaper ESR meters operate at very high frequencies, like 1 kilohertz. I've even seen one going up to like 100 kilohertz, I think it was. We need to measure it at where it's operating at. For 20 or 40 microfarad at 450 volts, I want to be looking at less than 3 ohms of ESR. Now, this is obviously the 40 microfarad connector. You can't see the screen, but it's 37.7 microfarad. Excellent. ESR 3.02. Excellent. I'm calling that in spec. Next one. This will be 20 microfarad, and I want to see less than 3. It's reading 18 microfarad. Good enough. ESR, a little high, 3.4. I want to see 3, but I'm not going to change it for that. That's near enough. And this one should also be 20. And the fate of that multi-can cap is now sealed, even though it reads 19.5 microfarad. And this is why you need to go a little bit deeper in testing capacitors. You just cannot measure capacitance on its own. You have to also, with electrolytics, you also have to look at the equivalent series resistance. This is 10 ohms. That's over triple the maximum value of ESR, which means this thing is now going to start building heat inside it, because as you know, heat through a resistor, and this is an equivalent series resistor internal. We're now going to start heating up the capacitor from the inside, the enemy within. Yes, I will change that now. That one was drifting up a bit above spec, but this is triple spec. So measuring just capacitance on its own, you would have passed it. It doesn't pass it with me. Okay, so the next day, this 470 ohm resistor was measuring way off. Let's just lift him out and just double check that. Now I want to see 470. Yeah, wow. It's reading 786 ohms. That is way out. So it may be that we end up adjusting this, but let's for a start, let's go back to its book value of 470. Just going to check this cathode bypass cap out of circuit. It's a 25, what is it? It should be 25. This is why it's really annoying when people don't put their capacitors in properly, you should be able to read that. 25 at 50 should be seeing a ESR reading of less than 1. It should be 25, it's actually reading 15.7. And the ESR is 1.8. Take that on my phone and hopefully I'll remember to put it in so you can see it. And I'm measuring this, as you may be able to see, at 400 Hertz, because this is not filtering our mains, this is playing frequencies. And so I just pick 400 Hertz. So that capacitor is going to get changed, and the 470 is going to get changed as well. But I'm going to keep an open mind about that 470. I'm going to check the bias later when we have a new 6v6 in it. Now, unlike a metal film resistor, which you can just grab and know that it's going to be pretty close to 470. 463.7. That's very close. Let's compare a couple of these Allen Bradley carbon composition ones. The colours say 470, but the actual reading, this is brand new, unused, 688 ohms. So 470 by branding, not necessarily by resistance though. This is another 470, 482, okay, I'm liking that one. This is another one I had, higher wattage, but the legs are too short on this. 486, that would have been a good one. I shall use this one. The spec says 1 watt, and I'm sure that's fine. That'd be even finer, but it just looks wrong on such an original looking amp. So you're going back in the box, you're going back in the box. Now you may have seen me use dividers in other videos. It just helps me get my lead lengths exactly right, so I'm not estimating wrongly. So that's the cap that was put in by previous tech. Good cap. I'm going to put in the same brand, Sprague. But for some reason, probably hit it with the soldering iron, it melted the insulation, the plastic wrapping off that. So I just straighten out these legs. I've got my duck bill pliers to help me get those legs nice and straight. That's the length that I want to bend at. I'm going to bend this so that the size of that 25 microfarad capacitor is pointing upwards. Viola, here's my 470. Straighten that leg out a bit. Right. These are nice long legs. I'm going to keep these offcuts. I just need to tin the ends of these. Now that's looking a bit waxy there. Get that motherboard with the scrub. Might just hit it with a little bit of heat as well. Wax is a great idea for keeping moisture out, but it's a double-edged sword, because not only does it keep moisture out, if moisture can get underneath the wax will hold it in. And as you know, moisture can get conductive. I'll be able to see how that wax is melting away there. Das ist gut. Das ist sehr gut. Oh no, I forgot to take note of which way this capacitor goes around. Should I put the ground, the negative pin, towards the tube, or should I put it towards the ground lug? Let's do that. Sometimes it's pretty obvious where it goes, But other times, when it's not so obvious, it helps to just make a little note for yourself. Then this one. The other thing to take care of when you're doing putting resistors in, try and keep all the tolerance bands the same direction. So if I was to put it in like that, with the silver tolerance band towards me, that'd be wrong, because all the other tolerance bands are that way, towards the rear of the amp. And that, boys and girls, is how that's done. Legs nice and straight. I can read the value, 25 microfarad at 50 volts. That's done. Now we're going to do our main filter cap, because that was way out. So previous tech had the semicircle is 40 microfarad, the others are, that's a square, that's a triangle, they're both 20 microfarad components, sections of that multi-cap. So we're going to stick to the same. I think it's a pretty good call that he made. So this is a potentially tricky part. Getting this cap can out. It's just held in place by solder. So you can go in over there. And I need to be able to heat this up enough so I can bend these tabs back up. This is the capacitor that I'm going to put in. It's 40, 20, 20, 20. I'm going to put the 40 microfarad cap just there where it says 20, and the others will be 20. And I'm doing that because I just like a slightly larger filtering cap for noise and responsiveness. So I'm just going to bring this up to here. And we had the semicircle, the 40 microfarad one there. So I just want to mark where my ground tabs are going. Okay, that's going to go there, and that one's going to go there. And I'll put my flux there. And with a properly sized soldering iron, I'm going to get a nice dollop. Look at that. That's the way solder should look. Not with one leg, not with one part of the solder starting to peel back, which just means you didn't have it hot enough. And you've got to have a pretty big soldering iron like this to heat a chassis up. Look at that. That's a perfect puddle of solder. All right. Now I want to get my semicircle around there. So you're the tab. You're the tab. Try and understand it. I'm going to get that as close as I can to the chassis. Right. Now, bit of tinning. Hey, laddie, that's what it's meant to look like. Now, the other one's holding in place. We can come back and finish this one off. Oh, and be mighty fine solder. Seeing if I can get this thing to catch fire by putting on the IPA onto hot solder. I'm thinking that's looking pretty good. Well, that looks like a mighty fine join. So we're not going to have an earthing issue there, that's for sure. Okay, that looks pretty good. Does that wire still have integrity, not breaking apart? No, it looks good. And that's going to go into the 40 microfarad capacitor, into this multi-cap can. And for those of you that say this is going to make it sound stiff, I say, I laugh in your general direction. No, it's going to make it responsive. It's going to make it quiet. So I don't care what you have to say. Now you'll notice we've got a spare 20 microfarad capacitor in here. So if we wanted to, we could double up, parallel a couple of these capacitors, and we could put it on, say, the screen. Because I like to have extra capacitance on the screen as well. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave it unused. Solder this connection straight to ground, but looking at it now, I think it's just fine. Because it is not getting its ground from that nut for the transformer as I thought. It has actually got a good solder joint to the ground, to the chassis ground there. So I'm going to leave that. That's just fine. Okay. Now let's have a look at this capacitor here. It's cathode bypass cap, but doesn't go to ground as you'd normally expect to see it. That's it here. It's 2 microfarad, not the usual 25, usual 1500, that's fine. But it's got this 47 ohm to ground, which we've seen before, and that's because we need to bring our negative feedback in from the speaker connection here and bring it back in, and that's a convenient point to put it. If there was a phase inverter, it would be there on the phase inverter, but there's no phase inverter as such. So I noticed that it is the original cap. So let's just make sure that it's still okay, because we've had to replace 2 other caps here, so it's possible. But you know me, I do not change components unless they are failed or in imminent failure. So expecting to see 2 microfarads at 50 volts. And where's my little ready reckoner? I do not treat this as if it is, you know, a gospel in the Bible. It's an indication. 2 microfarad, 50 volts, we'd be wanting to see something around about 3 to 4 ohms in there at 2 microfarad. And haha, here is the classic example of why you must measure ESR when you're talking about capacitors. Because if you were just to measure its capacitance at 2 microfarad, if you were to see that, you go, 2.5 microfarad. That's fine. But look at the ESR value, 32 ohms. It's like 10 times higher than what it's supposed to be. That means failure is not far in its horizon, so it will go to be replaced with another little spray like that, or whatever I've got that's in that capacitance range. Not critical, but somewhere around there would be great. Okay, got that capacitor out. I'll just check this cathode bypass resistor, or cathode resistor. And it's supposed to be a 1.5 and it's 1.6, that's fine. This is a 2.7K, this is our feedback resistor from our negative feedback loop. And it's reading 3 kilo ohms. It's about 11% over. I'm going to keep it. It's not going to have any adverse effect on the performance of it. Unlike the cathode resistor, if it was significantly out, I would change that, because that is how a preamp tube gets biased. This is minimal impact on the feedback. I might just do a little bit of that de-waxing before that capacitor goes back in, because capacitors ain't too fond of heat. That wax melted. You blow it up. Ouch, that's hot. Is my heat gun working? This is probably still set up, right? Yes, it is. Good. And I've got another 2 microfarad Sprague branding. Sprague. How can you say Sprague without doing a Scottish accent? Making sure my capacitor size lettering is facing upwards. There we go. Letters pointing up, leads nice and straight. Let's see if I can straighten up that fender lead a bit. All right. Well, whoever says 70s fenders weren't their highlight should look at this. This is a really nicely assembled one. Could be a little bit tidier, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Shame you can't see this, but candy apple red with a white pick guard. Nice combination. Best way to enjoy a coffee is with a at the end. All right, where are we up to? That's done. I'm going to remove this little capacitor that's just hanging here in space. It's not hooked up to anything. I'm going to see if we need it. I suspect it may have been there for oscillation. Then I'm going to try and clean off this silicon that was here. Let's see if we can find out why that was dumped with silicon between the plate and that heater wire. All right, that's got the worst of it off. Hello. I think we've got a bit of looseness here. It's better. This one, yeah, that's loose as well. When I get power on this, I will be checking to see if this capacitor is leaking. That's a pretty important capacitor for the stability of the amp. That's this fella just there, 0.02. If that's leaking, it's going to affect our bias. Right, I can now understand what the issue with this elastic was. This very important pin here, I'm not sure if you can see that, I'd say that's cracked and just hanging in there by the skin of its teeth. If you compare it to the other pins, you can see how solid they are. The plate, the highest single voltage in the amp, is very loose, ready to break. The filament beside it, pretty much the same thing. I'd say he probably Celasticed those together so they can reinforce each other, and hoping that Celastic isn't going to leak any voltage. So really the only thing for this is to replace that. You know, I wish I had one. Oh look, here it is. So maybe they're not that hard to find. And while I'm on there, I'm going to put this Bear Trap as its official nickname. So I'm going to remove all these wires. So if you haven't done this before, definitely write it down. I've done a few, so I think I can remember where they go. So pin 3, plate, is gone. That's the blue one. Pin 4 is our screen. Now there's no separate screen resistor on here. It's just depending on that 1K resistor. Now this is our, it's just pin 5, and this is our control grid. And it's going off to this, come on. Just going to snip that, I think. Going off to this coupling cap that we're going to check later to see that it's not leaking. I'm inclined to put a grid stopper in. I know it wasn't in the original, but it's good practice to have it in there. So I'll use a stock 1.5K value that Fender would use. Other people use bigger ones, which is probably better, but we'll stick with the traditional Fender value of 1.5. That's him released. Please release me, let me go. And you can go in there like that. Oh no, don't tell me you're not going to fit. Oh, you are, good. That's a bit unpleasant. I don't know that that's going to clear that mounting for the output transformer. What if I loosen him up a bit and see if there's any wiggle room? Oh gosh, I think we might just nick it in. It's just fit in. One good thing that, many good things that the previous tech did. Another one of the good things he did is you see these little diodes that he's put across the rectifier tube. Excellent idea. I do that on all of my amps and many of my customers' amps. It's just protection for the rectifier, and if it goes down, if the tube rectifier goes down, you've still got your diodes here, your silica diodes, rectifying away. You still get the compression, that's not the word I'm looking for, the sag from the tube, but you've always got these as a backup. All right, I'm going to solder these back in place. Too boring for you to watch. That is done. So I put the new tube base in, got the bear trap on the other side for when the tube goes in. You'll notice I put in the grid stopper here. That's just good insurance for the tube. Picks up less interference and creates a filter with the internal capacitance. Cleaned up the flux, even cleaned up that 50-year-old flux around there. I find this a little bit ugly, just floating there in mid-air saying, "What about me?" I wonder what's under here. Not even soldered together. He looks good. And now I might just tuck him under here so he's out of sight. Now, let's just check these are still tight. No, that's not. That one's quite loose. This one's even looser. Well, good thing that earth is well soldered to the chassis, because all four of those transformer bolts had come loose. I'm now going to slowly power up through the variac.
And so we have it, ladies and gentlemen. The amplifier appears to have most of the work done. But why don't I try it out? Well, I'm curious. I'm curious as to whether applying a large 5U4GB rectifier with nearly double the current draw and a EL34, which is double the wattage and a significantly higher plate current, will actually increase the volume. So next week, please join me. We're going to try it with the valves that it came in with, 5U4, EL34. We're going to see what the wattage is, and then we're going to put in the standard 5-way 3 and 6V6 and see how much of a difference in power there is, and if it's worth the extra strain that we put on our power transformer. I look forward to seeing you next week.